So, thank you for sharing. In March of this year, there was a platform called OpenAI who released a platform named ChatGPT, if you haven't heard of it. GPT stands for, because I haven't looked this up, Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And the appeal of this is it's a communication device. You really are able to type anything you want into ChatGPT, and it'll give you an answer. It uses all sorts of really fancy algorithms to figure out answers to the things that you're asking. Fun fact, I actually used ChatGPT to pretty much communicate everything about this night to you guys. So I asked ChatGPT, I'm doing a parent night for my youth group on AI. What should the title be? And it shot out Navigating the AI Frontier. I said, I'm sending an email to them. What should the body of my email be? It's exactly what I sent you. So AI created all of the ads for tonight's presentation. The presentation itself, I am not AI. I didn't write it with AI, but it's extremely functional and it's extremely fast. If you've never played with it, it's actually a lot of fun. A lot of teenagers just use it for recreation. A lot of people use it for recreation just because it's interesting to see what it shoots back to you. I use it particularly in a lot of instances for brainstorming. I use it if I'm out of ideas. It's a really good creative outlet. For our Instagram, all of our captions pretty much come from AI now. I just type in, we had a youth group on this theme, give me some ideas, and it'll pop out 10 ideas for me, and it gets my wheels turning. I don't necessarily use them, but it gives me ideas. And what it's doing is it's basically created a computer brain. So there were a bunch of software engineers who were basically able to replicate the ways that your neurons fire. And they were able to feed this software basically the entire internet. And it was able to consume the entire internet and create almost a personality for itself that's then able to communicate based off of that. If you ever notice, if you type into Google any kind of search, typically rather than just giving you websites that you can go to like Google always functioned as, now it typically gives you a preview at the top. And that preview at the top will list out a couple answers. It'll start to highlight things from different articles. That's actually using AI to search the web and to answer your question quickly. It's able to do it very, very fast. But the thing that's alarming to a lot of people with AI is the fact that we're losing a little bit of control with it. A lot of those who are developing these AIs have lost touch of how the AI is actually getting to its conclusions. I've got some examples later where they type things in and the people who made these softwares can't tell you how it got where it got. Now, with computers, everything is algorithmic based, but it's based on if this, then what. And the computer, we're pretty good at guessing at this point what the computer is going to shoot out because it's based on very simple algorithms. It's based on very simple this, then that. The thing with AI that's really complex is it's able to think for itself, and it's able to really develop as it learns, and it's able to develop, in a sense, a personality. And that's what's starting to scare a lot of people, is that the computers are starting to think like they do in movies. And that's a little alarming for a lot of the population. And this is through, like I said, deep learning. It's mimicking the brain, and it's taking all of these data sets, and it's able to come out with all of these different things. Now, where this comes into play is the fact that our culture is based on language. If we look at just the bare bones of what culture is based upon, myth, art, science, law, civilization is language. It's communicated. And now we have this language that's coming in. We have these computers, these softwares that are able to replicate our language to a scary degree that the question really is, how much is it going to be able to manipulate? How much is it going to be able to misguide? And how much is it going to be able to create on its own? The thing is that's beautiful is Pope Francis actually had a couple statements on AI just a couple months ago. He had an entire month based on praying for computer algorithms. If you keep up, he has a monthly intention, and one of those a couple months ago was basically for computers and technology, that we use it well. But what he's known for saying is the fact that we will always default to humanity. We'll always default to humanity. Because in the end, these computers, as we see, they're starting to scare people. and they're thinking for themselves, but we know that it's a computer at the end of the day. They've tested this in Japan. They've started to basically take out the entire workforce of restaurants, and robots are able to prepare food. I know someone who works for a culinary company that services Arby's, Buffalo Wild Wings. They've created a robot that has completely taken out cooks in making fried wings. And the robot's able to do the entire process on its own and deliver it onto a plate. And now they have the robots that can take it from that plate to your table, taking out a workforce. And these things that they've started to test, they've started to realize very quickly that people desire connection. People desire to be seen and to be looked at and to be talked to. And that's what the robots can't do yet. But the thing is that for a lot of us, we see this and our instinct is to shy away from it because we know it's not human. We know it's not real. We don't have a connection to it. And Pope Francis gives us this answer of if we want to counteract this movement, what we do is we invest in the real. We invest in the human. And there's a lot of creative uses for these things. Businesses are using them to look at data sets and to forecast for business, forecast for markets, all sorts of uses for this. But the interesting thing is I follow a lot of creative people who are involved in technology. A lot of people who are doing things for movies with CGI, computer-generated graphics. And particularly there's a YouTuber named Casey Neistat, who is a vlogger out of New York. He went from making $10,000 a week on YouTube to now he's making in the millions weekly just posting his life. He stepped down from it recently because he started to realize he wasn't as connected with his life. But the interesting thing is he came back and one of his first videos back was having ChatGPT write a vlog for him. So he said, I want you to write a script for a vlog and I'm going to make it. So this is Casey Neistat's vlog, written entirely by an AI. So, what's fascinating for creatives is someone like Casey, who his life is literally documented the last couple of years entirely on the internet. It's been able to learn it down to the camera he uses. If you notice, there's a lot of very striking details. It says what kind of camera, what kind of shot he should use coming into things. It knows he uses drones frequently. It knows the places he goes to. It knows his wife and knows that he's going to stop and see his wife at some point during the video. It's a little fascinating and it's a little intriguing, but it's also a little scary. But what Casey put on display is at the moment, it's not necessarily where it needs to be able to be used fully. It knows things and it knows how to represent his life, but there's a human aspect of it that's missing. The rest of the video, he goes into the fact that these computers, as they currently stand, are never going to replace us because they can't get the humanity. And what a lot of those in the tech world have started to realize are exactly these things. And these are 4 questions that were put forth by the Future of Life Institute. If you've recently noticed, Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, now Twitter, which is now X, is heading up this group that is starting to work with Congress to put a lot of laws into place of how AIs can be used. And when they put these forth, these are the 4 questions that they said needed to be answered before we could go any further. Should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda and untruth? Should we automate away all the jobs, even the fulfilling ones? The fact that they put that in is scary. Should we develop non-humans that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete, and replace us? And should we risk loss of control of our civilization? Now, it feels a little overboard to ask these questions, but the thing is, these are people. If you look at the list of names, they are the highest of high in the world of technology. They are the people who are on the leading front of all of this, and they're asking these questions because they're realizing it's starting to get out of control. The guy who made the car that can drive itself, Elon Musk, is now scared of the car because he realizes there's some loss of control here. And what they've said is the developers of ChatGPT, which is the premier use of AI currently, have said that they already have a new software that's about to be released that makes ChatGPT look like it's primitive. And that's really something that's fascinating, the fact that technology is able to develop that quickly. I watched some guys who create imagery using something called Midjourney. And they're able to type in keywords, and it's able to spit out within 3 seconds images that are perfectly rendered. They can give it art styles. They can say, I want a Vincent van Gogh painting of an octopus in the Baltic Sea. And it'll give exactly a Vincent van Gogh exact rendering of what they're asking for. And as this was developing, I was listening to a lot of podcasts who were saying, but if it did this, I would like it more. If it did this, I would like it more. And literally the next week's podcast, it did that because they were listening. And they were able to develop it, and they were able to create the software that kept up with their desires and their needs. Now, this is where we get to a point where how far do we push it? How far do we ask it to keep up with us? Because ultimately, it's only a machine. It doesn't have a conscience. They haven't developed that quite yet, and they never will, because we know that that's something innate to the human being. But it's capable of making great mistakes, and that's what is so problematic about it. They've used AI recently in hiring for jobs. And when they were doing this, they realized very quickly that the AI algorithm was only taking applications from men. They also used it within self-driving cars, and they said, avoid all human beings. But the AI legitimately only started recognizing Caucasian human beings. The AI is flawed, and we're relying upon it for things like this that we probably shouldn't be relying upon it for. Can it distinguish between the baby carriage and the shopping cart? We won't know until we try, right? And this is where things get really difficult. In a famous experiment, they offered an AI this picture of a husky, and they asked the AI to identify what was in front of it. And the AI shot out that it was a wolf and that it was dangerous. Now, they didn't realize why, because they said it's obviously a picture of a husky, but I could see how maybe if you take the eyes out of context, if you take the shape, it could look like a wolf. And they asked the AI, how did you come to the conclusion that it's a wolf? And the AI shot back this picture. What you'll notice is it cropped out the entirety of the husky, and it only looked at the snow. And the AI shot back and said, of all the pictures you've ever trained me on of wolves, they're always standing on snow. I didn't even pay attention to the animal. I only paid attention to what was in the background, to what you trained me. And that's what I figured out very quickly was the common denominator. This shows very clearly what the flaw is. It doesn't know necessarily what it's doing. It only goes based off of what we teach it. And in the end of the day, these people who are training it have no answers, ultimately, most of the time, of how it's getting to these conclusions. The only way to get the answer is to ask it. And it's able to tell you how it got to where it is. So this brings us to you as parents. What worries you as parents, and I think what it boils down to, what worries us as a society, is how quickly we're giving away our abilities to something that's so unpredictable. How quickly your teenagers are starting to not think for themselves, but to ask the AI to think for them. How quickly it's going to become that normal everyday tasks are not tasks that we're doing, but that we're typing into some sort of software that's able to pump out some sort of export. Now, in the lives of your teens, these are probably some of the AIs that they're using most frequently. You have ChatGPT, which is obviously the most often used. It's used for recreation. It's used for homework. I had a teen just last week laugh with me after she got out of confession because she said, I just asked Father Jack if using ChatGPT on my homework was a sin. And he said yes. And they're doing it often. And there's actually some algorithms that are counteracting this that teachers are starting to use where they're able to feed papers into the algorithm and it's able to tell you whether or not it came from ChatGPT to its best guess based off of what it's outputting. They're starting to come up with countermeasures. There's also one called Crisis Text Line. It's an AI counselor that you can text, and I have seen with my own 2 eyes teenagers at our parish who are using it. And when they have problems, they text the AI to figure out what they can do in their life. Instead of seeking out a human counselor, they're seeking out the algorithm. Now, what we did one night, I stayed pretty late one night with a couple of the teens, and we put it through the ringer. We tested it. And we asked all of its life's big questions, and it couldn't answer any of them. It did a very bad job of answering their actual needs and their actual desires, and it really only pushed them inward. That's why it's slightly concerning. Midjourney, I mentioned already, it's shooting out imagery. You can give it keywords and it's able to shoot out rendered pictures. It's not always perfect, but like I said, week by week they're getting a lot better. And they're on the brink of doing this with video, where you can give it keywords and it will shoot out a fully rendered video of whatever you want. There's theories right now that Hollywood's going to move away from actually making movies and they're just going to feed it to AIs because it can make the perfect movie. As Casey Neistat showed, we're very far from that happening. But as we've seen throughout all of this, technology moves fast. Upscale is being used to upscale imagery. It can take a blurry photo. It takes it down to basically all of the little tiny pixels that make it up. It feeds those pixels to an AI and it's able to recreate the photo in pristine condition. It's actually very scary how good it is. It's very, very good. Upscale is also being used by your iPhones. It's a very similar thing. When you're using portrait mode, that's an AI that's doing portrait mode because it's not able to literally have the camera lens far enough to be able to create blurriness in the background of your photo. So the AI reads your photo very quickly. If you've ever noticed portrait mode, you take the photo and it takes about a half second to shoot it back to you. That's because it's feeding it into an algorithm that figures out what the background is and blurs it for you. If you've ever zoomed in on those photos, it's actually not that good. You can see the areas where it messes up because they're still perfecting it. And then lastly, just released last month, Magisterium AI. Yes, you heard that right. The entire teaching of the Catholic Church has been fed into an algorithm. Only the teaching of the Catholic Church. They fed it every single document known to the church, and you can ask it any question and it'll answer it for you. This one, actually, a lot of theologians are very excited about it because there's a lot of documents they don't have time to read, and it's able to read it for them and digest it and shoot answers back. That one's actually, I was playing it with in my office the other day, and it's actually not bad. But they're getting better and better with it. But everyone is starting to use this. Everyone is starting to realize that these computer neurons fire very quickly, and when they fire accurately, they're good. When they don't fire accurately, that's where the problems arise. So, as our lives are moving more and more towards this, what you can be aware of in terms of your teens is a couple things. One, the data that they're feeding it. If your teen is typing things into ChatGPT, if they're typing things into the text crisis line, they're feeding ultimately a supercomputer their information, and we honestly don't know where that information goes currently. We don't know how it can be hacked. We don't know how it can be used. So be very aware of if your teens are using these platforms, they need to be very aware and trained that they need to be careful what they're feeding it. I remember as a kid, my parents used to teach me, you never sign up for anything, because back in my day, we would have all kinds of computer video games that I have to sign up and log in, and they would always check to make sure that I had the information, only the information that I should be giving it away. And they would give me very clear guidelines of what I could and couldn't give it. And that's what you need to start doing with your teens with AI algorithms, because we don't know how this information is going to be used, and we don't know how it's going to be manipulated. Cheating. It's honestly going to get to a point where it's stifling the education of our teenagers. We're already to a point where education numbers are a little alarming. COVID had a lot to do with that, of just placing them back a couple of years, and also just creating a new teenager who has different desires, who has different ways of doing things, and the education system is trying to keep up. But in terms of AI, the fact that I hear countless teenagers who are feeding it their homework, what are they truly learning? Their education is not going to be what it needs to be. So I would say be very aware of whether or not your teens are actually doing their homework. That's something you would think it's not something your teen might do, but it's really easy to get a ChatGPT account. Seeking purpose. Your teens are texting a crisis line for counseling as opposed to going to humans in their life who can answer their questions, as opposed to going to the church, as opposed to going to these places, they're asking these algorithms. And we need to start seeking to give them those purposes in a real, tangible way, to let them know that they have places that are real, that they can get these answers, and that they don't need to rely upon a computer. And lastly, creation. in terms of creating anything now, for a lot of your teens, they can create all sorts of good things, but they also have this world at their fingertips where they can create not so good things. When Midjourney was created to make these different images, they figured out very quickly, within a couple hours, it was being used for very bad, illegal reasons. And they had to start putting nets around it to figure out how they could rein this AI in to make sure that it couldn't generate anything, but it had a couple rules. And the AI fought back for a while, and they had a very hard time reining it in. So you might be at a place where you feel like your teen is sheltered in the best way possible, and that they're getting what they need to, and that you're able to filter out those things that you don't want your teens exposed to. But it's to a point where not only can they look it up on the internet, but they can make whatever they want. And that's slightly frightening. So this brings us to one other area where ultimately a lot of people are asking how this relates to the church. How it relates, I've seen priests who are being funny. I don't think they're actually doing it, but they're writing homilies on ChatGPT just to get a little bit of a giggle, playing up on the idea that we don't have to really do anything anymore, but we can just feed these algorithms and it will feed things back to us. I did see a church that did an entire service where they had ChatGPT projected on the screens, and they had the entire service led by the algorithm. You're not going to see that in Catholic churches, but there are churches out there that are starting to, in a sense, worship this. And as a church, it leads us to a question of how do we as Catholics embrace this. There are things like Magisterium AI, which I think could be a really cool benefit to the church. It could be something where we can really harness this technology for good. But there's also areas in which these can be harnessed and make us lazy in our faith. They can make it so that we no longer have to seek the Lord out fully, but we can just seek him out how he's going to fit into our box. And that box is getting to a point where I don't have to go outside of my phone to access the world. I don't have to go outside of my phone to create a world. And we have a God who's incarnate, who gives us a share in the ability to create. And as a church, we need to make sure that we keep that. We need to make sure that we are firm and resolved in setting our boundaries of how we're going to use these tools and how we want them. Now, when it comes to AI, there's ultimately three types of AI. And I want to finish by looking at this because it reveals a lot. There's three types of AI. There's narrow AI, which is the AI that's currently being used in a lot of circumstances. It's very algorithmic based. It's based off of what you feed it. And it can only really create based off of what you give it. So about a year ago, a lot of people were freaking out over deep fakes and people being able to fake videos. And people have been reporting that they've been getting phone calls from relatives where it's not really their relative, but computers have been able to replicate voices. These things are getting better and better. Deepfake technology, in terms of being able to replicate you, it's nowhere near close enough to be able to do that. But for those who have hours and hours and hours of pictures and videos online, it's able to replicate them fairly well. Those who are able to use it well, if you've been watching any Star Wars has been using it a lot. They've been bringing it back, young Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker. The first time they did it wasn't great. The next time they did it, fooled a lot of people. And they're able to do this to de-age. They're able to do it to in a lot of different functions. And these technologies are using what's called narrow AI. So it's only able to work based off of what you give it. So if you give it, in the example of Magisterium AI, this very clear fenced-in set of data, it stays within that clear fenced-in set of data for now. But there's something beyond that that's called AGI, and this is artificial general intelligence. Now beyond this is a super artificial intelligence. We're nowhere near that really. I say that now, but they're probably going to come out with it like tomorrow, now that I've said that. But that's the third type, but really the one that's alarming for a lot of us is AGI. Not just an artificial intelligence, but an artificial general intelligence. And what the AGI is able to do is ultimately to create entirely for itself. It's able to work based off of these algorithms, but it is not fenced in by them. It's able to work outside of them, and it's able to create on its own. There was an author, Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote a book called Homo Deus. And in that book, he posed the two things that all tech giants are searching for currently. All of them are searching for the same two things at the moment, and they're using AI to get it. And what they're searching for is a cure for death and a cure for sadness. Those are the two things they've identified as their goals. They want to make it so that you can live forever and that you'll never be sad. You'll be happy for the rest of your life. And how they're doing this is ultimately through what we would know through movies and books as cyborgs. They're starting to play with the idea of implants and replacing body parts with these AIs that are able to think for you, that are able to work beyond what you're capable of to keep you alive forever, and to make it so that you think only what it tells you to think. And their goal, ultimately, he poses in this book, Homo Deus, is to make a man who is God. And what is so fascinating about this is the fact that it's made most often by atheists who don't recognize the fact that we already have a God who is man. We already have this answer. And the one thing you can do in the life of your teen as a parent is to constantly remind them of this. The fact that if we go back to humanity, God took on flesh for a reason, because this flesh was redeemed. And he is not an artificial intelligence, he's a real intelligence, and he's the one that we pull from. And it's this basis that we must stay rooted in. And our teens, as they get swept into these trends, as they get swept into this technology, it's really easy to get swept away. I can tell you from experience, when you play with it, it's a lot of fun. And that's usually how it starts. And then you start to get to things that are deeper. You start to ask questions that are bigger. And these questions ultimately posed of, is this the downfall of civilization, are real questions. Because as you've seen, it's capable of a lot. And it's not doing it super well at the moment, but they're getting better each and every day. And the question is, are we going to just settle on fighting the technology, or are we going to actually fight what they're aiming for? And what they're aiming for are those larger questions, defeating death and defeating sadness. And what we have to remind our teens of, what we have to remind our culture of, is that we've already received the cure for death, and it's everlasting life. And we've already received the cure for sadness. It's a deep purpose. It's a recognition that in the cross is where we find our joy. And that's not necessarily something that's always going to feel good, but it's something that's going to provide that everlasting joy. And these, as a parent, these are the areas that you cannot compromise on. These tools are tools. And your teen using them at face value is not necessarily a bad thing. But as a culture, we've started to ask these bigger questions, and your teens are starting to ask them as well, of how far can this be pushed? And they're going to be the ones, it was famously said by a man well known, Adolf Hitler, that if you get the youth, you get the culture. And the goal is ultimately to get them, to make it so that their walls are brought down, and that they think you're just crazy for thinking that these are getting out of control. But as a parent, really, I encourage you, share the realities of these technologies with your teens, because they're using them, and they're going to start to ask these questions, and do it on the level that you feel your teen is ready for. But start to dialogue with them about these technologies, because it's vital that you are involved in that conversation, because these are going to sweep them away if we let them. But if we remain on the fact that we have a God who became man, and it's in this humanity that we ultimately find purpose, it's in this humanity that we have to invest in, there's nothing to worry about. I'm not worried about AI at the end of the day, because I know that the Lord's got me. And this is what the reality that your teens need to continually be reminded of, that you can continue to feed them. We'll just close in prayer, and then we've got a couple minutes. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. I'm not an AI expert, but I have done a lot of research on it, and I've played with it a lot. So if you have any questions, I'd love to answer. But we'll just pray to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we pray for our teens. We pray for those, particularly in our culture, in our world, who are advocating for us. Lord, we pray that they may advocate for the things that we actually desire. Lord, we pray that they may come to know you, and that they may come to know that these technologies will never replace you. Lord, we pray for those making decisions for us, that they make those wisely and that they turn to you. But Lord, we pray especially for our families, for our teens, and for our parents, that we can draw closer to you, that we can find you in the real, that you guide these parents to be able to shepherd their teens well as we enter into this unknown frontier. Lord, may you be